Welcome back to Faith Family United Church of Christ Sunday morning Bible study. We are in the middle of our series, Bible 101, where we go through each one of the books of the Bible, and we just hit the highlights, kind of more of a survey of what's in the Bible. Today, we're going to go over Joel. The last time I was trying to do Hosea, Joel, and Amos, and we got talking so much on Hosea that we only got through Hosea. So now we're going to talk about Joel and Amos. So we'll fast forward past all of our preliminaries and get right to Joel. There we go. Okay, Joel is a very interesting book. It is a very small book. It's only 3 chapters long. A lot like who got swallowed by the whale? Jonah. Jonah is a very small book too. But Jonah has a time frame. And what we see here...
There's nothing in your music library.
What we see in Joel is there's no time frame. It starts out, the word of the Lord came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Hear this, oh, you elders. So that's different from a lot of the other prophets. If we turn back and look at Hosea one time, it starts out, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reign of Uzziah. So it gives a time frame. So we see when he was prophesying. Joel doesn't give that. So that's prompted some scholars to suggest that Joel might not have been written before the Babylonian captivity, but rather after the Babylonian captivity, because of the lack of time frame. And therefore, his prophecy about being overrun is the next stage. That would have been the
Persian.
The time of when the Romans come in, and that would make sense, at least to us Christians, because in Acts, and we just had a sermon on this, the back second chapter, Peter stands up in front of the crowd and he quotes Joel. So, and we'll see that here in a second. But you see, that's so I think what Peter might have been suggesting, and what scholars point out, is that Joel seems to be the prophecy that Peter used, and if you look at some of the things that Jesus talked about, it might have been what Jesus was prophesying about when he talked about the day of the Lord, or the end of days, or the end of time. So interesting concept, but a lot of the message is to Northern Kingdom of Israel if it was written before the Babylonian captivity. And that's what the people that put together the Bible, that's what they originally thought. That's why it's right there, Hosea, Joel, and Amos. It's right in the middle of those, to kind of give it that time frame. So if it's in between two that we know the time frame of, then we're talking that Joel is also in that same time frame. So the prophecy is suggested to the northern kingdom. That's Israel, and of course the southern kingdom is Judah, or the southern kingdom, the kingdom of David. Which would suggest an even further back placement to before the Assyrian, like you were saying.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
There's always there's a tendency to forget that these books could have been written in a later time, reflecting the time of history. and they know the facts, and Daniel's like that.
Yes.
It knows all the facts of what's happened.
Yeah, what happened.
So it just puts it in the story.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that the scholars point out too. You know, there's people out there prophesying today, you know, this is gonna happen if we don't change. And that's what prophets did. This is gonna happen. They tell you what's gonna happen if things don't change. And looking back and seeing that, say, yeah, I told you back then. And that's what some scholars say, that's what the prophets did. They went and they told the people verbally, and then when it come to pass what they had said, then they wrote it down and said, this is what I told you and this is what's happened, look at it.
But the message is good today.
Oh, and it is good today.
That's right.
That's the wonderful. I did a class in seminary where it's called prophetic traditions, and we looked at the prophets and we tried to say, are there prophets today? And you know where most of our prophets today are?
Rap music.
Rap music or music.
Or hip hop, yeah.
Well, that basically talks about the times. Bob Dylan was a main character in that class. I chose to do my paper on the Police's singer Sting because he wrote a lot of songs. He wrote, I never forget these lyrics. It's in the song Russians, and it says, I hope the Russians love their children too. That, of course, that's back in the 80s, talking about the war. But he says, how can I save my little boy from Oppenheimer's deadly toy, and things like that. And there's one song that he had is on his self-album. He talks about General Pinochet down there in South America, where people were disappearing, and women were losing their husbands, their fathers, their children, and they go out in front of the prisons because the authorities would come and take them away, and they would take the pictures down in front of the prisons and they would dance with them, because if they said anything, they would be dragged off, and it was a terrible regime. Anyway, he, in his music, he prophesies about this awful thing that's happening, and the need for social change and everything. So we can see that then, and we do that today. You know, look at some of the churches. What is that Baptist church? West
Chase, I don't know, that used to.
That they protest.
In front of the Marines, the Saddleback?
Yeah.
No.
Phillips,
The ones
wasn't
that
it
go
Phillips?
to the
No. The one that goes and protests
Protest,
and says
soldiers.
that the reason why we're in Vietnam, the reason why we're in Iraq and we're having all these soldiers die is because we're a gay nation, and
West Chase,
I've never heard of it.
what is it?
West Chase.
West Channel. Anyway, but that's what they do. That isn't that they're trying to explain something terrible that's happened by pointing the finger and saying, this is why God's punishing us for that. And some people say that that's kind of what had happened looking back, and they say this is why we were carried off to captivity, and they put it as a prophecy.
But God makes it pretty clear that we're the reason we went off into captivity.
Because of idolatry and unfaithfulness to God. So, and then Joel uses the term the day of the Lord. Now, the day of the Lord is prophecy. Here is a time of wrath. Usually in the Old Testament and in the prophets, when they talk about the day of the Lord, it's supposed to be a joyous thing. But it's like the saloon door. It swings both ways, open and shut. Yes, to those that aren't doing what we're supposed to be doing in unifying, being caring, compassionate, all of a sudden your society is going to crumble, and you're going to have these terrible things, and it's going to look like wrath on you. But if you're doing those things and you're faithful to being compassionate and caring and inclusive and you're not oppressing people, or you're not discriminating, and you're inclusive, I said inclusive, I'm gonna say it again, inclusive, then it is gonna be a time of joy, because everybody's gonna be able to prosper. So, Joel kind of looks on the negative side of the day of the Lord. And like I said, it could be the coming destruction of Jerusalem, the same that Jesus talked about.
But you know, if this was forecasting what was going to happen with hindsight,
Yeah.
it would be after 70 AD,
Mm-hmm.
written after 70 AD, which I think is too late.
Oh, this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it was after 70 AD. I do think it was foresight if it was talking about Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because I think that it talks about Jerusalem, and Jesus picks up on this. And later Peter, when he's addressing the crowd on the day of Pentecost, he picked up on that. And he's saying this is what Joel had prophesied.
They had the book.
So, yeah, that I've already said all that. Remember that in the Bible, the day of Yahweh, the day of the Lord, it says Lord, and that's all capital letters. If you look in your book Bibles, a lot of the Bibles, they hold to the Jewish tradition of not using the tetragram, YHWH, which is Yahweh. Some used to say Jehovah because the Y's, J sounded in the Germanic languages. So, but they don't say the Lord's name, because you don't say the Lord's name in vain. So instead of saying Yahweh or this, they would say the Lord. So the day of the Lord is actually the day of Yahweh. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then the question again about, was he referring to them returning or being taken away to the Babylonian captivity, or was they, like Christians have suggested, he was pointing further to 70 AD when the temple was destroyed for the last time?
Or he could be referring to the end of times.
Or is he referring to the end of time? Or is that because this idea of forever, the Hebrew word is olam, forever, does that mean forever, or does that mean just a long time? You know, because we say, oh, this is going to take forever. Do we really mean that, or do we mean it's going to take a long time? And so, is it an idiom suggesting it's going to be a long time, or is it, the end of time, is that the end of all time, and God comes back, and we're all going to heaven, new earth and new heaven, or does that mean the end of an era, and we're now into remember the 60s or the 50s and 60s was the jet set age, and now we're in the internet age, and soon we'll be into
AI age.
So what does the age or the end of the time mean? So anyway, it's interesting. And then of course the famous quote is, afterwards I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions, even on my servants, both men and women, Southern Baptist Convention, women. I don't know if you all know, but they just voted that in the Southern Baptist Convention, women are not to be preachers.
Well, they did this.
They did that again?
It's an again thing.
Yeah. So, but I will pour out my spirit in those days. Again, the days thing. So, and this is what Peter recited on the day of Pentecost when he said, explains why we're speaking in your understanding in your own language. We're speaking in different tongues. He says this is the Spirit of the Lord. So that might suggest that Joel might have been seen as a prophecy of the beginning of the church, a new age, the end of the old age, the Jewish age, and the new Christian age had begun. So
There's a lot of confusion among people at that time. They're very confused. When's Christ coming?
That's what that's what we say, but what did they say? When is Messiah coming?
Yeah.
For the first time. So what's interesting, we do this too. We take something, someone has a message, and instead of listening to the message, we want to break it apart and make it into something that it's not. Case in point, Colin Kaepernick, when he decided he was not going to stand for the national anthem. So the first time he did it, he sat on the bench, and he got a lot of backlash from it. So he went to one of his military friends, friend he knew from high school and all that. He went to one of his military friends and said, how can I do this protest and not be offensive? And he said, take a knee. He was told by a military person, take a knee. That would be less offensive, because it is representing like when you hand a flag to a widow or something, the presenting officer or NCO takes a knee and hands him the flag. So that's what he told him. That's why he takes a knee. But yet, it was all about being disrespectful to the service members. At least that's what they say. But at the same time, they weren't listening to the message. The message was, we're not all land of the free, you know? So he was saying our words in our national anthem are words that we hope for, but we still need to strive for that. That's his message. But instead, they try to take something out of what he said and say, no, what you're doing is you're doing this. No, listen to my message. And that's important. And that's important when we look at the prophets too. What is their message? What are they talking about? And not get hung up on the destruction and on all the other things, but what are they talking about?
Every story in the Bible.
Okay. And okay, so let's do Amos in 8 minutes. Amos is a call for social justice. We had a group that used to meet in our seminary, and they was called Amos. It was the name of their group, and they did social activist type things, and that's what it is. It's a call for social justice. While Hosea emphasized God's love and mercy and forgiveness, as him taking his harlot wife back, and being faithful to her even though she was unfaithful to him. That's the analogy or of Hosea. Amos was forceful spokesperson of God and demanded. I put called, but he demanded from the people that they do justice and have compassion. That's pretty much the main gist of Amos's what he's talking about the strangers, caring for the strangers in your land. And Amos says that he's going to disobey and judge his people because of their unfaithfulness, because of their disobedience, and their covenant breaking ways. Remember when Israel first began, God made a covenant with them. God made a covenant with Abraham, and then God made a covenant with the people of Israel to be their God and them his people, and he was going to make himself known to the whole world through them, and that's where Christ comes in. But this is the reason why that God was going to judge them, because of their unfaithful ways.
Well, they
broke the covenant.
They broke the covenant
when they looked after different religions. So 1 through 2, judgment on all the nations. He just lays it out. All the nations are going to be judged. for their compassion and their social justice. If you treated other nations, attacked them, killed them, took them away to slavery, you're going to be judged, and that's what that is saying. The first part of 2:6 through 16, the judgment of Israel. So he lets, you ever see this, somebody do this? They start and they pick on someone, and they go, and everybody's like, yeah. And then he turns around and he goes, okay, let's talk about Israel. It's like, uh-oh. So that's what he does. He gets them riled up, and they're like, yeah, judge them. And then he turns, and now Israel, and they're like, oh. So judgment for ruthless oppression of the poor. Holy moly. Where's Amos now? He needs to come back.
Here's what I found.
Okay, I know where Amos is, don't worry. Profaning the religion, idolatry. They said that they would actually, in the temples at this time, the priests would do their duties, and then they would have other things in there that were from other religions. And they were actually felt like they doing their duties, okay, scriptures say we got to do it like this and this and this, okay, so they do it like this, and then they do everything properly, and then they're done, so they can go and have a beer with Bacchus or something, I don't know, with another god. The god Bacchus is the Greek god of wine and merriment. So they're profaning the religion, even in the temple. So that's a big one. This contrasts to how God treated the other idolatrous nations versus how God treated Israel. In other words, he let the other nations do what they want. They fall into whatever they want. But God had always protected Israel. But Amos says, but because you wanted to do their ways and not our ways, your time's coming too. So, this is what I tell, this is what I preach. When I talk about the church as a whole and how, I call it it's called the Constantine shift. It's when Constantine went and made Christianity legal, and then later on it becomes the religion of the empire, Roman Empire. But before that, they've been persecuted and they've been set aside and everything. And then when they set free, instead of flourishing and doing what they're supposed to do, they kind of take in the worldly ideas and incorporate them into the church. And so the church kind of went down. And I'm getting we're done.
No, I have something to say.
Oh,
I've been raising my hand. If you contrast Amos and Hosea is like, it's like a parenting style, right?
yeah.
Hosea is like, I love you and you should do this because because it's the thing to do, it's what you should do. And Amos, when you get frustrated with your kids and all of a sudden it doesn't matter why, just do what I say, because if you don't, this is the consequences. So that's how kind of Amos put it to the Israelites, was like, look, you better do this or else, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't want to hear his message. As a matter of fact, it talks a lot in Amos about how go somewhere else, tell somebody else this. We don't want to hear it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And it just always has reminded me, as a parent, as you get more and more frustrated, that's always how I've made this analogy in my head to Amos as being a frustrated parent.
Go ahead.
If you not assume, this is God's message to us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are always in tension with this argument that he's put out there. This is as valid today as it was back then.
Most definitely. Yeah, I think it's more valid today because of, we talk about the 1%.
We should know better.
Yeah.
Which speaks to the fact that because the whole world is in this mess that we're in, the whole world has to change for the end of time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 3 through 5 is oracles against Israel. Once again, this is all the things that you've been doing wrong. 5 and 6 is judgment of an unjust people, and this is the announcement of the coming exile. This is, okay, you did not protect the poor and the stranger. And this is the interesting thing, right? You did not protect the poor. You oppressed the poor, you used the poor, and guess what? You're going into exile because of that. You're going to be slaves. You're going to go over here to Babylon, and you're going to see what it's like to be someone that's not in your country. You're going to be the stranger. You're going to be the one oppressed. You're going to be the one. But guess who they left? Guess who they left in Israel and in Jerusalem? The poor people. You know, what's that saying? The meek shall inherit the earth. That's exactly what happened here. The rich people that were doing all the oppression and treating the poor wrong, they're carried off and they're made, the slaves in Babylon. And the poor people, why are you going to take them? They're poor, they're weak, they look scrawny because they don't have enough to eat. And so they left them there, and they're able to stay on the lands that they own, that they used to work and everything like that. So I think that was interesting. Anyway, 7 through 8, chapter 7 through 8, the vision of divine retribution. Thank you. I can read and I can speak. Divine retribution, basically, this is the wrath. This is what's going to come because, and it's just because you have broken the covenant. You have done the things that you weren't supposed to do, and this is what's going to happen. And then at the end, Amos does a wonderful thing. He leaves us with hope. Leaves us with hope. And that's the restoration of Israel, blessing David's descendants once again. A descendant of David will sit on the throne and be king over Israel. So, I love that. Paul, in his epistles, he does it kind of the opposite way. He builds them up. He comes, he says, "Oh, you're doing wonderful job. I think you did a great job. You're just flourishing as a church. I'm so glad that I knew you, and you're doing great things in the world." But, and he gets them up there on the pedestal, and then he kicks the pedestal out from under him, and then he just lets them have it. But you do this, and you do this, and this is happening at your churches. Amos is just the opposite. He's like, okay, here we go. Those other nations, this is what's going to happen to them. And then Israel's like, yeah. And Israel, this is what's going to happen to you. Like, whoa, we didn't expect this. We thought this was a pep rally for us. And then at the end, after they're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But he says, but his but comes back with hope. He says, but there will come a time when we'll be restored. And that's the hope that he is. Any questions?
Nice.
So that's Hosea, Amos, and Joel. Next week, who we got next week? Obadiah.
Great name.
Yes, I love Obadiah.
Jonah.
And we'll do Obadiah by itself, and then we'll do
Jonah.
yeah. We'll do Jonah because it's a story. It's a story of prophecy. All right.
Then we got my
So
favorite.
we will. We're done. Cut me off. I thought my cameraman cut me off. We'll do Obadiah next week. So that's it for our Bible study. We'll be back on here in about half an hour with our service.